Science? Good science.
Good science. Whether it's good science worth $8 billion is an absolutely legitimate question. And if scientists can't justify these expenditures to the American people in a time of great stresses on the discretionary federal budget, then the money shouldn't go to science.
What about the well-publicized failures of scientific missions like the Mars mission, the Hubble telescope, the spy satellite? Did that cause a lack of support, do you think, Anne?
Oh, well, of course it has. I mean, NASA had a fairly spotless reputation. But if you actually look, if you take the shuttle out of it, which, as Carl says, is not really about science, and you look at NASA's record of successes and failures, it's really quite impressive and probably better in the last 10 years than it was in the first 10 years. So I think to some extent, it's a failure of NASA to make its case to the American people. And as Carl says, I think that in a democracy, if people feel that this is not the right way to spend the money, and if we have large-scale illiteracy and hunger, then that's something that we have to deal with.
You don't think there is one point, though, and that is there's a danger of eating the seed corn, because science is the pathway, the aperture to the future in the most practical terms. All sorts of seemingly abstract and obscure science leads to the most practical inventions in the future. So we have to be very careful about not swinging that meat axe too carelessly.
You don't think that people now regard NASA as a Cold War creature, do you?
NASA is in part a Cold War creature. The mission to the moon was in the context of the strategic arms race with the Soviet Union, and the Cold War is over. The Soviet Union has collapsed. And there has to be another reason than just beat the Russians. I think there are excellent other reasons. You explore other planets, you gain great insights into your own planet, you find out about origins, which every human being is interested in. You know, where did we come from, our planet, and all of that. And, as I say, science, by accident, unexpectedly, winds up with the most practical discoveries in the long term.
25 years ago, science research constituted 5.2% of the federal budget. Today, it's 1.7% of the federal budget.
And most of that is still military. So it's even more important to distinguish the civilian from the military research.
That is a staggering turnabout, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And you worry about it.
I think every American should be worried about that, especially at a time of declining economic competitiveness, when Americans are unable to compete, to invent, to read, to count. I think it is definitely something to worry about.
This is what Carolyn Maloney, a representative from New York and a Democrat, says about the super collider. $100 billion for a Motel 6 in space. No, this is for the space laboratory. $100 billion for a Motel 6 in space, when we have an infant mortality rate in Harlem that rivals many third world countries. So there's just so much of the pie as Congress sees it and the Senate sees it.
But wrong target. I would like to see Carol Maloney concentrate on the $300 billion still spent on the Department of Defense when the Cold War is over, when there were no strategic adversaries anywhere in the world. That's the big pot in which we are spending inappropriate amounts of money, in my view.
Do you expect another mission to Mars, manned or unmanned?
In the long term? I mean, the astronomical timescale is very long. I don't think we're going to see human missions to Mars in the next 10, 15 years. And it will only happen if we do it collaboratively with other nations. It's simply too expensive and too hard, at least in the near future, for any nation to do it by itself.
Rational life in outer space. The Senate and the House in their conference denied a $100 million disbursement over 10 years. You have written about this. You wrote about it in Parade magazine, did you not? And you said, conceivably, this might be, that is, the high-powered radio telescope in combination with, a sonar impulse into the hemisphere,
we're listening for possible radio signals from civilizations on planets of other stars being sent our way. That's the idea.
But the radio telescope was where this money was going to go.
That's right.
Plus the sound technology that would also be involved. Am I right on that?
Not sound, but radio.
Radio. All radio.
All radio.
You said conceivably this might be the last generation before contact is made and the last moment before we discover that someone in the darkness is calling out to us.
Conceivably.
That sounds like poetry, but it's more than poetry. It's science.
There's a place where those two things meet, and this is one of those places. We're talking about NASA and this question of the search. NASA also gave us the Voyager missions 1 and 2 to the outer solar system. We had our first close-up look at 40 new worlds. They were on budget. They exceeded the design specifications of the engineers wildly. 15, 16 years later, still performing magnificently. This business of the search for extraterrestrial life, we're talking about $10 million a year, which we know is really negligible in terms of the federal budget.
And yet
something, I mean, the whole world, even those people who were ideologically opposed to us, they admired America for its forward-lookingness, its positive approach to the future. This is another way we're telling the world that we've given up on our future, that we don't have that vision anymore, and that we're prepared just to look within without any hope of finding anything out.
I'm going to take a break in half a second here, but I've got a compulsory question. Is it your intuition that there is rational life somewhere out there in the darkness?
Intuition doesn't count in science. Evidence is what counts.
There's no evidence.
There is no evidence.
So there's no basis for intuition.
In fact, intelligent life on Earth is an open question.
Well, we've got more to talk about. We'll be right back.
Still searching.
Four and a half.
Not yet, but it would be 4.5.
We're talking about the age of the Earth, and Carl Sagan says it's 4.555
Billion years.
billion. B as in boy.
Billion as in boy.
The Earth.
The Earth.
How about the universe?
About 15, plus or minus a few.
15 billion years.
Right. So the universe, the age of the universe from the Big Bang to now was 2/3 over before the Earth formed.
How old is man?
The human species is a few 100,000 years old. The human family is a few million years old.
The human family, you're talking about primate.
No, I'm talking about some of our now extinct ancestors. Primates, apes and monkeys, are some tens of millions of years old.
Okay. You've left the heavens and you're now directing your focus on the Earth in this book, Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, A Search for Who We Are. This is a beautifully executed paperback edition of a book that appeared last year. What is the central thesis of this book, if there is one?
There are two or three, but I think the most central thesis, or our motivation for writing the book, was we were trying to understand why human beings behave the way we do, why we hit each other over the head, why men have a tendency to abuse women, why we are xenophobic, afraid of strangers or other groups, why we think our group is the group that knows exactly how to cook everything right and how to dress right, and those other guys are somehow wrong. What is the origin of those feelings, and is there something hopelessly wrong with us as a species? Are we a bunch of irregulars, or is there hope for us? Do we have hope for a future? So Carl and I made a pact with each other. We looked each other in the eye and we said, wherever this journey takes us, we're going to go. And we thought, because we began writing this at the beginning of the middle of the nuclear arms race, we thought, well, we'll look into the relationship between the United States and what was then the Soviet Union. And then we realized we had to go back a little bit further because the roots of that problem were in the Second World War. And then we were back to the First World War. And before we knew it, we were back to before the human species, to the evolution of non-human primates. And then we thought we'd go all the way back to the beginning.
Okay. Tell me what you mean by this. It seems very clear, and this is a conclusion that you draw after some analysis. It seems very clear that there's only one hereditary line leading to all life now on Earth. Underline now, on Earth. I'll repeat. It seems very clear that there's only one hereditary line leading to all life now on Earth. Every organism is a relative, a distant cousin of every other.
Hi, cousin.
How are you, cousin? What does that mean?
It means that everybody on Earth comes from a common ancestor a long time ago. Some of us more closely related than others. It also means that there may have been different hereditary lines that died out, but none of those very different hereditary lines are around today. For example, we and the chimpanzees share in common 99.6% of our active genes.
You mean to say that the only thing that separates us from a chimpanzee is 0.4% of our chromosome
of our active genes, the ones that are actually working, not the ones that.
So the genetic difference is minuscule.
0.4%.
But look at what that 0.4% does. I mean, that gives us a space station. It gives us. It could give us a super collider.
Yeah, that's right. Except we were humans 10,000 years ago and 100,000 years ago, and we didn't have any of that technology. So the technology can't be our defining characteristic.
What is it?
It's very hard to figure it out. Annie and I looked through the very certain statements of all the great Western philosophers, Aristotle, Plato, Augustine, Aquinas, every one of them, and they all said there are unbridgeable gaps between us and the other animals, and they listed what those were.
It's called rationality, ratiocination, the power to reason.
That's one of the things, but chimps really reason. There's no question about it. Likewise, the ability. Memory, yeah. Absolutely. Earthworms remember. Paramecia remember. The ability to use tools, the ability to make tools.
Well, are we talking about a difference in degree?
Yes.
Only degree.
Not color.
Only degree?
Only degree.
So you're denying species?
What do you mean?
No. They're different. All
no. Well, you're denying that the essential species, the animal species, and man is a species.
Human beings are one species, and there are 10 million other species.
But you're talking about degree. They're further down like a continuum? Talking to Carl Sagan and Druyan, the authors of Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, and we have been talking about the relationship of man to primates.
Man and woman to primates.
Man and woman to primates, correct. I was speaking of man in a more philosophic sense, but I accept the correction, and I hope there's no offense.
No, it's very gracefully accepted, I thought.
In this connection, you will remember that in chimpanzee culture, if that's the right word, culture.
Yeah,
that's okay.
Culture is the right word.
Okay. In chimpanzee culture, the female chimps uniformly defer, as your book indicates, to male chimps. Now, do you think that should become a pattern, a basis for women deferring to men?
Well, but you left something out, and that is, as we say in our book, there is an exception to that, and that is that under stressful conditions, for instance, in cases of overcrowding, which I think describes very well the way we live, in fact, when the male chimps pick up a rock and start to throw it at another male chimp, which they are wont to do, it's the female chimps who courageously interpose themselves, even though they're routinely physically abused, and they pry those hairy fingers away from the rock, and they say, cool it, and they calm the males down. They play, I think, an almost saintly political role in chimpanzee communities in those situations.
So that goes to your point made here in the book, where you say we can't help but wonder what would happen if women played a role in world politics proportionate to their numbers. Right. So you see a preponderance of the male principle as fighting civilization in the true sense.
Wait. First off, no matter what the chimps do, nothing forces us to behave as they do, because we're not chimps, we're people. Secondly, whatever predispositions we may have towards sexism, which is essentially what your question was about, we have other counterbalancing predispositions: compassion, altruism, self-interest. And one of the main messages that we took away from the study that led to the writing of Shadows is this: that we humans have contrary propensities. Yes, we have propensities towards sexism and racism and xenophobia and dominance hierarchies and all that. But we also have propensities towards problem solving and compassion and love of children and all the rest of that. And these conflicting propensities, the working out of those propensities, is what the human condition is about, and also is the key challenge of statecraft, to evoke the propensities that are appropriate for our circumstances and to discourage the propensities that aren't. And that's why it's useful to know what the propensities in us are by studying our relatives.
A little mechanistic?
Well, what do you mean?
Well, I mean that well-trained animals will do what they do routinely through instinct. But there is something separating beyond...
you've slipped back to your scholastic training.
Well, there is something separating that permits...
What is it?
Well, I think it's the reach of a man and a woman.
What does that reach mean?
I think that there is so much determinism and so much instinct in the way animals behave, even developed animals, chimps, that they're nowhere near the power of true ratiocination that man can do. But let me move on. I want to ask you something.
I completely disagree.
You do?
Yeah.
Me too.
I think they're smart, and you underestimate how smart they are, and you underestimate how instinctive we are.
Jurassic Park. What did you see in that film?
Great special effects.
What about genetic coding and that type of thinking or play out?
Well, that's a message as old as Frankenstein, which is over 100 years old, which is that scientists make these Faustian bargains. I guess this goes back before Frankenstein to Faust. That scientists who lack humility do these things without really thinking out the consequences. And it's a form of arrogance in itself to think that you can, tear at the fabric of nature, take a thread out here and there without unraveling the whole thing, without slashing away at the whole fabric. And so you shouldn't do that. But I'd like to see a movie in which the values of science and the methods of science, which I think are kind of brilliant error-correcting machinery, are shown to be something that should be more a part of our life, not less a part of our life.
Are you engaging yourselves in the ethical dimensions and the other dimensions of human genomes, the $3 billion project, and boutique babies, so that you can, by a combination of genes, assemble a human person exactly as you...
See, that's exactly the circumstance Annie was just talking about. That's immensely arrogant and dangerous, because we're not smart enough. We don't know enough, nowhere near, to do that without all sorts of ghastly, unanticipated consequences.
We're talking about generating a child that will grow up to be 6'2", blonde hair, blue eyes, IQ of 150. Leadership qualities, disease-free.
Yeah, that's right.
But may I say that we've been doing this kind of stuff for as long as we've been human. Female infanticide, which is so prevalent even today in this world that there are 100 million females missing out of the world population, is a form of that. It's just a more primitive, ham-handed form of this same kind of nonsense.
Well, do you disapprove of the research?
No, I think the Human Genome Project has all sorts of opportunities to help cure and circumvent genetic disease. It will save a huge amount of tragedy. But the idea of boutique babies, first of all, it's technically much further away. But however far away,
but it's there.
However far away it is, that seems to me immensely foolish. That's exactly in the tradition of the Faustian bargain and Frankenstein and all of that. That's outsmarting ourselves.
Mm-hmm. You visited Vice President Al Gore in early October, and you talked to him about religious groups who are involved in the National Religious Partnership for the Environment. What is it?
It's a new alliance between leaders of the major or the most populous religious faiths in the country and scientists on behalf of the environment, kind of new coalition in which we say we don't have to agree on how creation came to be in order to want to preserve it.
Now, you're on the board of directors. Does that say anything about your theology or your religious belief?
No, I'm an independent in religion as in politics.
Is the jury out with you?
I am a searcher, but I have high standards of evidence.
How about you, Ann?
This is my idea of what the highest form of piety is, and that is, in a universe as vast as ours, as ancient as ours, with beings as young and foolish and ignorant as we are, to say that we know what God is or how this universe came to be is a form of arrogance I don't subscribe to.
Carl Sagan and Ann Druyan, thanks so much for being our guests.